way down over his ears. Some hair is
Following
going
day,
to show.
December 8th, he was sentenced
In the year 1976, 46 years ago, Virgil Presnell was sentenced to death for the murder. Hello and thank you for watching the Death Row and Executions channel. I'm Paco Rivera. Elizabeth Dorlene Sennett was 45 years old. Everyone called her Liz. She provided community services in her hometown of Sheffield in Alabama, caring for the elderly, tutoring school children, and more. She was very devoted to her family and her husband, the Reverend Charles Edward Sennett, who was 46 years old. Charles was the son of a minister, and he simply followed in his father's footsteps into that life of religious preaching. Liz had two sons named Charles and Michael, known as Chuck and Mike. By 1988, her sons were grown and married and had children of their own, and Liz was overjoyed by her role as a grandmother. Liz was said to be the rock that held the family together. She and Reverend Charles Sennett got married in 1962, and when Charles was no longer able to work or practice his ministering because he was suffering from severe illness, Liz got a job as a secretary to make ends meet at home. Eventually, Charles Sennett got better, and he was able to get back to work. On March 18, 1988, he had spent much of that morning doing work at the church where he was a regular pastor. He returned home from church several hours later and found his wife lying in a pool of blood on the living room floor. She was barely alive. Charles Sennett immediately called paramedics, but Elizabeth died a short time later at the Helen Keller Hospital in Sheffield. Who attacked Liz was a huge mystery. Everyone loved her. The autopsy and investigation showed that Liz was beaten with a galvanized pipe and was stabbed with a knife in the chest, neck, face, and head. Detectives investigating the case were baffled by the home robbery. Only a VCR and a stereo were taken. There were other valuables around the house, and Liz's purse nearby had quite a bit of cash in it. Either these two thieves don't know what they're doing, or this was not a robbery. First on the list, of course, investigate the husband, because it's always the husband, right? And here's what they find out about the God-fearing, Bible-reading, and preaching church minister who had devoted his life to Jesus Christ. Investigators learned that Charles Sennett had an airtight alibi when witnesses at the church said that he was there all morning when Mrs. Sennett was killed. However, a member of the church congregation did inform investigators that Reverend Charles Sennett was having an affair with a woman that attended that church who goes by the name of Doris Tidwell. Investigators attempted to interview Doris Tidwell, but she quickly lawyered up. But not before the investigators learned that Charles Sennett had recently borrowed $3,000 from her, telling her that it was to repay a bank loan. You see, Charles Sennett was not only heavily in debt, he was also broke. Authorities also learned that Charles Sennett had recently taken out a life insurance policy on his wife, and he stood to earn a very large payout from that. A reward of $10,000 was offered for any information leading to the arrest of those responsible for the murder of Elizabeth Dorlene Sennett. And then the bombshell happened. An anonymous caller to police first asked if the reward was still being offered, and when the caller was assured it was, that caller then provided all the details police needed. That caller could have written a book on this crime. The caller knew the names of 3 individuals that were hired to kill Mrs. Sennett, and that her husband, the pastor, was the one who hired them. The caller was able to give the home addresses of all 3 perpetrators, described the cars that they drove, and how much money they each got. $1,000 each. $3,000. The exact amount that Reverend Charles Sennett borrowed from his mistress, Doris Tidwell. The caller then provided details about the murder, things that weren't reported in the news and that nobody could have known unless that person was there or it was told to that person. If the Reverend Charles Sennett had counted on everyone involved keeping their mouths shut, man, was he ever mistaken. That was enough for police to quickly arrest the three men. Charles Sennett, while tight on money, did own a property aside from the one that he was living in, and he was renting it to a man named Billy Gray Williams. Williams was first to be arrested. Next was two old high school buddies of now 21-year-old Billy Gray Williams, 19-year-old John Forrest Parker and 22-year-old Kenneth Eugene. After the arrests, their homes were searched, and the VCR and stereo that was taken from the Sennett house were recovered. The three confessed and confirmed that Charles Sennett first contacted his renter, Billy Gray Williams, who would accept a $3,000 payment from Sennett for his wife's murder. But Billy was just the middleman. He would not participate in the actual kill. He got his two friends to do it. He would keep $1,000 for himself and give the other two $2,000 to split. The men told investigators that John Parker and Kenneth went to the home of Charles Sennett and told Liz that her husband had sent them there to look around and possibly use the grounds for hunting. Liz first went to a telephone, according to Kenneth Smith, apparently to call her husband at the church, and then returned to the men saying it would be okay for them to look around. A short time later, Smith and Parker returned to the door and asked to use the bathroom. After they were inside the house, they attacked her. Before leaving, they took a VCR and a stereo, as Charles Sennett had advised them to take things to make it look like a robbery. Kenneth Smith had also told a detective that his partner in the crime, John Parker, tossed the murder weapons, a knife and a galvanized metal pipe, into a pond near the home. That was later recovered by authorities. Police would now go after Reverend Charles Sennett, but it was too late. Before they could get to him, on March 25th, 1988, about a week after the wife's murder, Charles Sennett had gone to visit the home of one of his sons. He had arranged for his other son and other family members to gather there as well. Possibly realizing that too many people involved are talking and police were closing in on him, he made confessions to his family about his relationship with another woman from the church, who everyone in the family was familiar with, and that he had been unhappy with his life with Liz for quite some time now. According to his family, who were later interviewed, he never did admit to hiring hitmen to kill his wife, but soon after his other confessions, he went outside to his son's backyard on his own and shot himself in the chest with a gun and died. A year later, in 1989, Kenneth Eugene Smith and John Forrest Parker were both convicted and sentenced to death. John Forrest Parker's execution by lethal injection was carried out first in Alabama 12 years ago on June 10, 2010, after serving 21 years on death row. Liz's two sons, Chuck and Mike, had attended and were witnesses to that execution. In that first sentencing of Kenneth Smith in 1989, the jury had voted 10-2 in favor of death, and the judge agreed. However, his conviction was reversed on appeal in 1992 when it was ruled that the prosecutor had displayed racial bias when selecting jurors. Smith went on trial again in 1996, and he was found guilty again. Only this time, the jury voted 11-1 for a life without parole sentence, and the judge disagreed and sentenced him to death a second time. Alabama was one of just a few states that gave judges the power to go against a jury's recommendation. Why bother to let the jury vote if that's the case? According to a comment received on this channel from subscriber Vader, that law was changed in 2017, whereby the final discretion of life or death is based solely on the jury's decision. Thank you for that, Vader. Kenneth Eugene Smith is scheduled to be executed this month on November 17th. Billy Gray Williams was sentenced to life without parole and was incarcerated at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Jefferson County, Alabama. However, there is currently no record of Billy Gray Williams as an inmate there or anywhere in Alabama, so I'm inclined to think that maybe he has since passed. I can't find anything on him. If you have access to the Investigation Discovery Channel, their TV series American Monster did a story on this case. Season 3, Episode 11, called Take Me to the River. I don't know why it has that title. I didn't see anything about a river in this case, unless there's some religious or biblical connotation with that title. I found it interesting that the man who contracted hitmen to kill his wife, Charles Sennett, and his wife, Liz, were buried together, and that the families, especially Elizabeth's family, had allowed that. I know that if someone killed me, I wouldn't want them buried next to me afterward, even if I'm dead already. If you would like to see more of these death row stories, please subscribe so that you are alerted when the next one comes out. I'm Paco Rivera. Bye for now.